Okay. I was able to update and add an agenda to just a little while ago, so that we have one on the online. And put it in the chat as I'm talking. And linked in the agenda are the minutes from our last meeting that Greta has been gracious enough to continue to keep taking, and I see Greta's here, so thank you for being here, Greta. But I think our focus today, assuming everybody's on board, was to look at the Gantt chart that we haven't looked at in a while, in order to set the stage for the work that's really core and central to the task group for the coming months, as requested by SEBI, and really important for us to be grounding in again, so that we have a realistic timeline and expectation for work this fall. Andrea is just back from vacation. She's gracious enough to have updated the Gantt chart quickly, and then I was able to just plop in the dates for the upcoming subcommittee meetings and council meetings, and have that for me to open and share, and we can sort of talk through the work plan for this group in the coming months. And then at the end, we can also spend a few minutes hearing from Andrea an update on the transportation RFP that AOT has out, as well as any other updates, including perhaps what's happening with ACC2 right now, as well as our expectation of bringing forward to you all an agenda for the hearings associated with ACC2 and ACT at our next meeting. So I'll pause there and see if that makes sense to everyone. Good. And I know Joey texted me and has touched base with Jared that she can't join today, but was able to pass on some thoughts that Jared can hopefully articulate too. Okay, I'm assuming the minutes are good as drafted and posted. Any comments? Great. I will provide a little bit of context and then share the Gantt chart, and others feel free to do the same, but just for the benefit of some of our newer task group members and others. This task group, as a reminder, came to be in order to bring forward additional recommendations to the Climate Council in the transportation space. This task group is essentially an extension of the cross-sector subcommittee, working to advance any research, engagement, analysis needed to bring forward recommendations that would actually funnel up through the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee to the Climate Council. Originally when we adopted the climate plan, the expectation was those additional recommendations would be put forward for June in late spring, and we had taken that as June for the Climate Council to consider. Understanding the engagement that you all wanted to do and the analysis we thought was prudent to do in order to put forward policy recommendations, the council agreed to push back that timeline to this fall, with the expectation that getting recommendations agreed upon was beneficial ahead of the legislature coming back in session next year. So we've been sort of plugging away at some of those initial components of the work plan in order to get us to recommendations. But now that we have a council schedule for the fall and it's fast approaching, as well as the fact that we know more about a timeline for the analysis that AOT is doing and that we won't have for this fall, we thought it was prudent to bring back up the Gantt chart as just one sort of easy way to see the dates in front of us and think about how we're going to meet the expectations of those dates and start to craft a work plan in order to develop recommendations for this fall or beyond that. So that's what I tried to do with Andrea's support in a revised Gantt chart, and thought we could pull that up and walk through it. But before we do, any other comments or questions about that before we do that as a structure? Hearing none, good. I will go ahead, Jared.
I was going to say that sounds good.
Okay. Okay. So Andrea, fresh off her, fresh, new on this job, and then fresh back from vacation, revisited the Gantt chart. And Andrea, I don't know if I'm happy to walk through it. I'm happy to let you walk through it, up to you.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and I can fill in any details specific to, the items related to the carbon reduction strategy. Does that make sense?
That sounds great. So, and I already told Andrea, I think I messed up her Gantt chart because I didn't really use the formulas for the date. I actually manually entered them. So it's probably just a rough sketch at this point. But most of the work up front for SEBI and others just seeing this for the first time, I will say that most of the work out of the gate was sort of building engagement, first and foremost with the counselors, to get them up to speed with like the limited number of policy options that really exist, as well as inviting the public into those conversations. So we held a number of public engagement events with the intent of educating folks around what a low carbon fuel standard is, where it exists, what is a cap and reduce, cap and invest policy, where do they exist, and sort of starting to build some base understanding of sort of the limited tools that exist right now as per a policy regulatory framework for reducing transportation emissions. And so we did all of those. Our hope, just to say at the beginning, was that we could actually move forward pretty quickly with a technical analysis that sort of scaled those policy options to Vermont and put forward the most cost-effective co-benefit policy so that we would have some grounded technical analyses to inform these policy recommendations to the council. And along the way, we didn't have a clear funding source in ANR's limited GWSA technical analysis budget, and at this also made a request to the U.S. Climate Alliance to further assist that analysis, but they pushed back on us to use the funding that was coming to AOT around the development of a carbon reduction strategy. And so that's where we're at. And Andrea took the lead with AOT, using some of the work that we did as a task group to put forward a technical analysis proposal to develop the proposal for the carbon reduction strategy that is now out and closes this week on Friday, with under review by projects that are already consultants that are already on retainer contracts for AOT. And so maybe I'll let Andrea, just for the benefit of this conversation, recap for all of you the distinction between now what is a two-phased technical analysis that AOT is doing, of which phase one was not originally envisioned in our technical analysis, but will be done before we move to phase two, which was really the premise for the technical analysis this group wanted to do.
Yeah, I can do that. I'm just gonna, I'll just point out that, I mean, it would be a general discussion anyway, but one of our retainer consultants is on the call. So we won't get into any background or details. All this stuff is in the scope of work that we posted. So I just kind of want to clear the air there that RSG is one of our consultants on retainer and Jonathan's on the line. So yeah, so I don't know if I'm just not seeing the screen right, but there's a couple of line items in here that talk about the two different phases. And we've gone through this before, but phase one is basically to develop a methodology to evaluate our investments of the capital program and see what impact that has on greenhouse gases. So we say impact because we don't know if it's positive or negative, reducing, adding to. So that is the phase one work, and we have that scheduled. We want that to be developed and then sort of tested out on the 23 program, and then be prepared to present what that analysis does for our 24 program. And that deadline is middle of January-ish. I'm not sure if the dates on here exactly align with what we put in the scope of work, but then the phase 2 is to use that information to develop a carbon reduction strategy so that we are making sure that our investments do have a positive impact on reducing greenhouse gas emissions to the extent possible. And so we know what investments are most appropriate to do that. So that's the phase 2, and that is that carbon reduction strategy through the funding that is provided for this in the IIJA. That date is November 15th of 2023. I believe in the scope of work that we had was more like a September timeframe, if we even put that in, but that's where we're kind of thinking September timeframe that information would be given to us. So again, I'm just coming back from vacation, so the details are a little bit blurry to me, but somewhere around September of 2023, we would have that carbon reduction strategy in hand. We will develop a technical committee and an advisory committee made up of somewhere around 10 people or so each. The technical committee will be more involved in the phase 1 work, and the advisory, both committees really will be more deeply involved in the carbon reduction strategy development itself in the phase 2. And that phase 2 is where we see more of our stakeholder engagement and public engagement happening.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead, Gina.
Maybe I'm getting ahead of this. So you do this, you evaluate the programs, you determine their benefits or the negative aspects of them, and then you realign the budget or the programs around reduction. I mean, how does that happen? How do you balance these things? And does it go back to performance measures? You know, I sent you, there was a thing in Georgetown last week, released this national performance measure around greenhouse gas reductions. Will you use something like that to help determine what the agency should do, or you just don't know? You got to see what
I think I don't specifically know right now, but I imagine that's what we're going to learn. So yeah, there is a notice of proposed rulemaking that I don't even think there's been an announcement about it, but I don't think it's formally been posted. I think it's supposed to be posted this week. And I think it's either a 60 or 90-day comment period on that, but you're right, it is for developing performance standards for DOTs to measure their greenhouse gas impacts. So it falls completely in line with this, I think, from what I've scanned so far, which isn't much, but I see it aligning with this. And then, yeah, once we have that methodology to analyze our impact, we're going to sort of test it on the program that we already have and the one that's coming to see where that puts us, and then understand how we have to adjust in future years to sort of optimize our programs to the extent that we can with all the other things that we need to make sure roads are safe and have capacity and whatnot. But yeah.
Okay. Well, this is going to be very, very interesting, and I think very important for the council to keep track of the work.
And I think ideally, like this would have been like a year, like now.
Yeah. Right.
And this is why, like, trying to reconcile what we get to this fall and what we get to with this a year from now, I think is really important. Understanding that, phase 1 in my mind kind of think it feels like a more detailed gap analysis, like really how much can we accelerate on existing programs to get us emissions reductions, and a more refined understanding of what, it's sounds like the ACC2 ruling is going really bad. I'm going to, Icar hearing. I'm going to let you guys keep talking and I have to go back. They're trying to sabotage the rules, which would make this work even harder. So hold on.
Get on it.
I'll be back.
Great.
Well, I think it's just important for everyone to understand that this, and I think I've said this before, that this work is about VTrans's program and their investment in transit and their investment in bike ped and how that balances with roadway operations and maintenance. And it's not about energy standards or cap and invest, I don't think.
The phase 2 part does have some information about considering other policy regulatory
So
recommendations.
Federal Highway will let you do that. Get away.
Let's do that. They let us put it in the scope of work. I mean, I don't know to what extent that will be. The scope of work calls for the consultant to develop, I think, up to 4 scenarios and give some specificity about what a couple of those scenarios has to have as far as it being part of the VTrans stuff, like all VTrans without the policy, just
is a sort
different
of
scenarios that we could put together. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting time. And I can't wait for this work to go and see what we can learn from it. And I do wish it had already happened. It would be ideal if it.
I hope you're working with other states, that are ahead on this stuff and sharing information.
Yeah, Michelle's at NASTO right now, and I know she's working with other states on what they're doing. And then there's going to be certainly work groups, state DOT work groups that are working on the comments to the proposed rulemaking, and other states presenting where they are. Colorado is pretty far ahead on this stuff, and a couple of other states are too. So yeah, definitely.
Chris has his hand up.
Yeah, I put in chat, but I would suggest that we also work with VTrans. And Andrea, I don't know what this is looking like yet from your perspective, given where you sit in VTrans, but really asking that the new road standards, new road design, which haven't been updated since 1995, be used to implement the cap. We've got a big issue now in that right now, like say if a town gets a grant to do traffic calming on state highways to go through a village, and to me there's a fundamental problematic issue with that to me that should be VTrans really focusing on that, not the town having to fund that, but or having to take that lead necessarily, but make it easier for the municipalities to maintain those traffic calming best management practices, as opposed to having to take over the entire section of road, basically making it a class 1. Most towns will balk at that. But it's going to be a core issue going forward. Right now, it's a 15-foot chunk of steel that's really deciding what the standard should be, because it all goes back to maintenance. So that's a pretty big deal. But one of the issues, I think this should get better with EVs, the noise in village centers and elsewhere, but increasingly, and I'll be honest, it's part of the reason why we moved right out of the heart of the village center, but the noise going through village centers is making life on highways where you don't have, really slow people down. It's getting to be a little bit unlivable. But to my mind, that's another really practical VTrans policy where a lot of good things could really happen. I know that you guys are beginning to have the internal conversations about that, and I gather that won't really get underway until next year, but it's a really important opportunity.
Yep. Definitely, it is. And you're right, it won't really get underway until next year. So Jane left us without the Gantt chart.
Oh, no.
Let me see. She might have shared it with me. Where is it? Mm. So I wonder what they're doing over there in Icar. Because it's not a lot, but it's important. It's like what we've got right now. Okay, so let me,
Well, hopefully it's not another agency that's throwing wrench in the works. I mean, that's what Icar's about.
mhm, yeah. I don't know that I've ever shared a screen on Zoom. I don't know how to get you guys back. Uh-oh.
No, it's good.
Okay. Now all I can see is Eugenia. I don't know what happened to everybody else.
Don't do that.
Okay, that's better. Where was Jane? So this is, I mean, as far as the next steps for the carbon reduction strategy, like Jane said, the proposals are due this week. We're gonna do a quick turnaround to get a selection made by the end of next week. And then I'm sure there'll be a couple of weeks of contracting admin stuff that has to happen. So we anticipate having things kind of rolling by the beginning of August. And I will be reaching out to many of you about participation on either the technical committee or the advisory committee in the next week or two, as we nail down who we'd like to invite to participate in that. So here they are today, presenting to Icar. And then I don't know if Jane, obviously we didn't have this meeting, we can get rid of that line. I'm not sure if Jane added that in anywhere else. I think we need this, we had this on for a placeholder for when we were gonna do the technical analysis through A&R as a webinar update on where we were. I think we just need to hold off on that until we have a consultant on board and we figure out exactly how or what type or what kind of engagement we'll have, at least during phase one. And maybe that will just end up being technical committee meetings or stakeholder. So we'll figure that out once we have a consultant on board and we nail down a schedule. She added in a couple of lines here of meetings. I'm not sure of the dates on there, but I'm not sure and if we need to have a discussion or if we know right now what our plan is for public engagement for advanced clean cars, but I guess maybe that depends on what happens today too. But to anyone else's recollection, have we nailed down the public meetings for that?
Based on the email traffic I saw this morning, their A&R has nailed it down pretty good.
Okay, I have not caught up on my emails at all. So that's good.
So they're in the locations that we talked about at the last meeting. Yes, and
I just know the email traffic, it looked like they were trying to nail down like the final location. So that seemed to be the case, yes.
and the RPCs are helping to facilitate that.
Okay, great. Scroll down so you can see more of it.
Just a brief footnote for future budgeting purposes. Everybody wants free venues, but increasingly those are really difficult to come by. Most towns are even charging, for use of venues. So and schools frequently do as well. So if I'm no longer a commissioner or council member, when the time comes around to talk about budget, just something to keep in mind when they may need to increase money for outreach venues. Can't necessarily rely on the free.
Good point.
You can come to Craftsbury. They're all free here. No one ever comes here, but other than the ski.
So, I mean, I don't know if you want to go through this line by line. We still have recommendations being made for an amendment to the cap for this year. And then again, following the work of the carbon reduction strategy for next year.
I don't see how we can do that. Right, guys? I don't see.
I disagree, and I talked with Joey about this. I think that it's important to be clear what we mean by a recommendation.
Okay.
I think that it would be difficult for us to make a very specific recommendation with like a fully developed kind of policy with, option A versus B kind of throughout the policy chosen. I think that will take more time and analysis and public engagement. I do think, however, that we know, and Joey told me to make sure it was clear that I was expressing this as her opinion as well, that we do know through our research and analysis and through the webinars to date, that if we are going to meet our legal requirements, it will take one or the other or both of a cap, which could be a cap and invest program or a cap and reduce program, and or a performance standard covering transportation fuels to have a chance to meet the requirement. I think with more time, the transportation task group could deliberate to compare the pros and the cons of a cap approach versus a performance standard approach. And then within each of those approaches, the different design options to make sure that we're elevating equitable and cost-effective emissions reduction. But I think we have a responsibility to make a recommendation with as much information as we have at the time. And I, for one, feel, based on the research and analysis we've done, based on the public engagement events we've done, based on looking at all the other states, we can at least make a recommendation that we know that we need to do one or the other or both of a cap and or a performance standard on transportation sector greenhouse gas emissions.
But at the end of the day, the recommendation is we need to look into this more.
Yeah, and I think that that could be both us and or, I could easily see that being a recommendation to the legislature, where they then take up testimony on some of those very questions. And ideally, whoever our consultant is in phase 2 of that work is looking into those pros, cons, key considerations, design options relating to a cap-based approach or and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. I mean, there are questions about bandwidth and how they would interact, but I feel like we at least have to narrow the universe of options. But I don't think we can say we know it should be X or Y, with all the detail underneath it yet. But I think we do have a responsibility to say what we know as of, and I feel like please tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like we've at least achieved that degree of clarity, that we know we need either a cap or a performance standard.
Yeah, I think we need to show, and we have, that there's nothing else, right? It's the negative that we have to demonstrate, that there's nothing else, that all the buses in the world isn't going to fix it.
Yeah, we need an overarching policy that requires emissions reductions, whether that's a cap or whether it's a performance standard.
Right.
Nothing
We
else
all-
gives us the clarity of
We
conversation.
all know that. The question is, how do we convince the policymakers and the politicians, and I guess they're one and the same, and the public that that's true?
And I think we've got a great start there with the transportation policy options memo. I think that you know can be further refined and made more publicly accessible, and we can do more public engagement work around that. But anyway, I'm going to stop. I think I saw Sebi wanting to speak. So
I just wanted to echo. I couldn't agree more with your suggestion that we should advance something, because we can't wait until September 2023. And the reason I said that last transportation group meeting was like, the legislature is going to have a session, and if the initial purpose of this group was to come up with that gap, we should at least push them in a direction that helps. And to your point, Gina, I think if we make that recommendation, people will beat the bushes for, well, what else could we possibly do? And hopefully it brings it much more into the public eye, and is tested more rigorously over time. I don't think of the Climate Council as like a top-down authoritarian, like we've decided every detail of this, as has been shown since the Climate Action Plan was released, because we don't have that degree of power, but we do have the power to push forward the conversation. And it really did strike me in April when those pieces came out, or maybe a little bit before, with the transportation pathway. It's like, all right, it's not like we have 1,000 policy options here. We have a few. And so that seems like fertile ground to dive a little bit deeper. And that's what I thought we were going to be doing at this task group coming in, which is why I asked for a little bit of clarity. So I appreciate all that conversation. And I'm willing to do some of that work offline as well. I know that we only have this meeting an hour and a half a week.
Well,
I can probably stop sharing this schedule, right? I mean, I'm sure we need to work on the timing a little bit. I don't know if anybody has any recommendations on what we do with this or how we use it. I think it is important for the public and others to understand where we're going and what our plan is. So if anybody has suggestions on items to add or detail to add or take out or anything like that, or how we sort of get it ready more for, normal viewing, let us know and we'll make those changes and have it ready. Chris?
I don't know where it fit exactly, but just doing my research, called Chura, which is focused on moving towards zero emission vehicles. They did research on gasoline super users, and their research suggests that if you look at who is really driving the most miles in the least efficient vehicles, they tend to be not the people for whom EV or ZEV incentive programs are targeted. And in California, it looks like a bill has been under consideration about identifying, who those users typically are and how to restructure those programs. But I would say that's, to the extent we might want to reach out to them to look at Vermont, because that's kind of that describes, I think, a lot of our users. Like, where do you have the most impact? You need to address first is the folk who are burning the most gas and least efficient cars. And those tend to be people who are driving long distances to get to and from work. And so that could be, that kind of policy could be a way to try to start addressing some of the just transitions and equity concern, but also, frankly, addressing more the concerns of the general public about people who don't necessarily see themselves in an EV or ZEV or how they're going to get there. Because part of the lens that they're looking at the world through is how many miles they have to drive to and from work, you know, in a car that they can afford to buy, which tends to be older model, high, you know, lower mileage vehicles. So anyway, it might be worth us hosting a conversation with Culture or some of the other groups looking into this stuff, because it seems like that would really fit well into our rural context. But not sure exactly where that fits on the chart.
Jane, you have your hand up.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Sorry I had to duck out and come back on. I was hoping just so I could thoughtfully engage in this or help in any way. I was curious where and how you all are thinking about preparations for the subcommittee meetings and council meetings, and had some ideas on that, but wanted to hear what you all got to on that, because I didn't see any notes in the column. Did you guys not talk about that yet?
Well, Jared raised an important point, and I won't try to, I mean, I could summarize. You want to say what? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I'll try to summarize.
Basically, we're there, and then we just have to figure out how we package it. Right.
Jane, what I offered, and I wanted to be clear that it was speaking on behalf of Joey as well, is that while we're not at a point where we can make a very specific policy recommendation, I do think that we know enough from the research and analysis, the transportation policy options memo, all the examples of other states, the webinars we've done, the conversations we've had, that we do know that if we're going to meet the GWSA requirements with a high degree of confidence, we need to either have in Vermont a cap, which could be a cap and invest program or a cap and reduce program, or a performance standard. And so I think we need to make a recommendation that
He froze in the.
He froze.
Good point.
I thought it was at my end.
I never know either.
Jared?
No,
Was
it's a cliffhanger right there.
that is a cliffhanger for a really big policy recommendation. My assumption is there's consensus among the subcommittee members and counselors that they're moving to a set of concrete recommendations that they're ready to draft.
No, that we have these notions that we want to further investigate. We haven't, we have to do the study, but that's not until the next year. But we want to
That's great.
keep moving towards this.
Yeah. So the recommendation is a strong statement on a need for a framework for the transportation sector via a cap and invest, cap reduce, or performance standard. And these are the tangible, so there's a strong statement, and then there's these tangible recommendations of how to continue to advance and hone that over the next year.
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah, and that's where the study will come in. I mean, Andrew, does that make sense to you, knowing so much about the scope? Are we going to get some definitive answers out of the scope that you described for phase 2?
I don't know. I think Jared should finish his sentence, because it sounded a little different when you said it, Gina, compared to what I thought Jared was proposing. So
Greta,
Sorry,
Greta,
There was a pregnant moment there where you just stopped talking.
my computer just died, and I don't know what happened. So
it was
apologies.
like so. like crest of like, you were right there, man.
Well, let me try to follow through. So, and it is that I think we do know, based on the research that's been done, the examples of other states, the webinars we've held, the conversations we've had as a task group, that at a minimum, what will be necessary to meet the GWSA requirements is either a cap, and that could be of different variations. It could be cap and invest or cap and reduce, or a performance standard. And that at the very least, we need to tell the legislature that it's going to take one or both of those options, and that they may not be sufficient on their own. But I feel extremely confident that we cannot have anywhere near the degree of confidence we need to in meeting the cap without at least one of those policies. I don't think we're going to be ready to say we should do, a cap and invest program designed this way or a performance standard designed this way. Maybe we could get there over the next couple of months with a lot more work and public engagement, but I feel like we're going to want the benefit of additional analysis. I feel like the committees of jurisdiction in the House and Senate will likely want to take testimony on these options. But I think that that can be a real step forward, is saying we know there's not like an unlimited universe of options. We've got to do at least one of these two things and maybe both. So let's at least say what we know as of now, and then also identify the additional research, additional public engagement we want to continue refining that and honing in on more specificity.
So Jared, would we know the questions we need answered, that kind of thing? Or do we put that in the hands of the legislature and then ask for the funding to do it?
I think we know a lot of those questions in the design of the RFP that we all worked on together.
Yeah.
That, it's questions around how do we advance the commitments and principles we've agreed to as a council, centering equity, looking at cost-effective emissions reduction. I think you get into my personal opinion, and I think this is clear in any kind of scan of different policies, is that a performance standard or a cap and invest program are not, not inherently equitable or inequitable. Whether or not they are depends on the design of the program and the use of the revenues. And so what we'll want to make sure happens is, after we say, well, we need either a cap or we need a performance standard or both, the key question is how to design it to advance as many other commitments we've made beyond just the emissions reduction requirement, but around equity and around cost effectiveness and around, some of the other pieces that are already in that RFP.
That sounds great. So I would imagine some of the other components of that are like the tangible steps to get there beyond the question. So like perhaps you might allude to emissions reporting or other components of tangible action steps we could be taking while policy design is still being formulated via stakeholder engagement, technical analysis, legislative input, beyond.
Yep.
Should we be determining funding for this? Because what he described, I think, is different than what Andrea described VTrans is doing. That's not going to answer, that research effort is going to be important, but it's not necessarily going to answer the kinds of things that we're just talking about. And how do we fund that? Because otherwise we'll just end up where we did this year. We don't have any money. So should we be asking the legislature for the money to do the work?
Andrea, can you say more about that? Because my sense is that a lot of what is teed up in phase 2 would answer those questions, right? Am I missing something?
Yeah, let me share my screen again. I was trying to like do a simple cut and paste and struggling, so I'll just share my screen. Did I not do it? Jeez. I think this is it. So
Yep.
this task 3, this is in phase 2, is to develop and evaluate the strategy scenarios. Can you all see that big enough? So we say
So,
to look
so
at the, go ahead, Gina.
it considers it, it doesn't define it. It considers it. If you had thus and such a program, here's what you would need to do in the VTrans programs. This isn't an effort to define, to better define the cap and invest program. It's just taking an off the shelf idea and
Well,
putting
then
it,
we ask for these scenarios.
okay.
I think that those latter bullet points look good. I do have to confess, though, that when I saw that on the previous page, I get a little bit concerned by seeing the word "they may study that." Shall. I mean, I feel like we know that's the work that needs to happen, right? It shouldn't be an optional thing for the selected consultant to.
Well, in
Oh,
this
that's the
part, it does say the
policies.
scenarios shall include one specifically and exclusively for typical transportation infrastructure and service investments, another specifically and exclusively for policy and regulatory approaches. And
Sorry,
two,
it's hard to read it on my phone. I may have missed something, Andrea. My
on your
apologies.
phone. I can imagine it's hard to read on your phone.
But I think it was on the previous page that
It
was like on the
was.
lead into this. Okay.
And it does, you're right, it does say may also consider, but then in the scenarios, we say one of them must be just looking at the regulatory approaches.
Well, as long as you can dive in, do a deeper dive on those approaches and start to define those approaches, then it would make sense, because that's providing the context for evaluating the VTrans programs, I think. You know, as long as you're able to do that with this budget and with this contract.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's pretty clear.
Okay.
I don't know, you know, the main goal is to look at our transportation investments and understand that. But I think we recognize that that may only get us so far.
Okay, and you
And so
can make efforts to do the economic analysis.
it's just going to be an analysis. It's not going to be a recommendation specifically for one over another, but it is going to provide scenarios based on those. So you would think there's some kind of
Cost
you know,
benefit and all that.
yeah.
Well, I think
Don't think we have like anywhere in here that we should you know, get recommendations on funding sources for these things, but it does talk about the cost efficiency of each and you know, how much we'll get bang for your buck kind of thing out of which options. So
I think making sure that Jared's on your technical advisory committee is going to be important, and Colin and others.
yeah, we've got a list. Many of you involved. So I'll stop sharing that.
So, Jared, I assume you and Joey proposing that you'll, maybe with Gina or others, a subset of this task group will write up the recommendation, and does the timeline of like bringing that forward to cross-sector subcommittee, either in July at the July meeting as a groundwork for the council meeting make sense, or August?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's a good next step. And I think that if it is July, I would ask Joey to take the lead on drafting that. If it needs to go towards August, I can be more helpful then. I mean, I can be helpful in July as well, but my schedule's a little
Maybe it's
busy.
just an update in July and then the actual written recommendations for cross-sector to consider in August.
Yep, I can see that.
Great. Okay, anything else on timeline then or work plan for this right now?
Well, Jane, I just wanted you to know that I agreed heartily with what Jared said.
Good.
So I'm happy to help offline too.
That's great. I think both Jared's going on sabbatical and Joey's off for like next month and a half. So I'm sure they would take you up for help.
Yeah, although my sabbatical is from day-to-day EAN responsibilities, and I recognize that my climate council appointment does not go away during that time, so I will be attending necessary climate council meetings, but won't be as working quite as much on this stuff as I normally am.
I do like to say that the only two people who have read the climate action plan front to back are Julie and Jared. So if Jared, if
I don't
you need
believe
to
that.
not
I
be
think
the
there's more.
110% that you normally are, I'm okay with it. You get a pass. Oh, Greta has read the whole thing front to back. I'm really impressed. I wrote a lot of it, and I wouldn't say I've read it front to back. So every word. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Agenda. Sorry. So just so everybody knows, the next thing is the update on the Icar hearing. They didn't vote on it, which is not ideal for timeline, but they were overwhelmed by how complicated the rule was. They had it third on the agenda after a bunch of other stuff. They asked a bunch of questions, and we pushed back on the timeline to move it to their August meeting because it would mean we wouldn't be able to have our public hearings when they're scheduled, and therefore then wouldn't be able to adopt the rule December 1st. Spoke strongly about extensive engagement that was already done through the Climate Council, as well as the administration's support of these rules in the Climate Action Plan. And they agreed to have a special meeting of Icar within the next 2 weeks to keep, just for this rule, just to keep us on schedule. So as long as they do that and meet in July, we can still meet our timeline and obligations to be able to have our hearings in September and still stay on schedule. But that was kind of surprising. And A&R's Icar rep was not there, which was also surprising. So I'll have to check in on that.
Who is it? Was it Secretary of Administration asking these questions, or?
It was Deputy Secretary of Administration asking questions.
Okay.
And
An A&R.
our A&R rep. Well, we were there. A&R.
Yeah,
was,
no, but
A&R's
their person on Icar wasn't there.
Yep. Diane Bosfield was asking a lot of questions.
Icar hasn't changed.
Icar hasn't changed. Yeah.
I hope V-Trans was supportive.
V-Trans rep wasn't there either, and so our due diligence side. I got the transcript now, so I can see. Rachel, our attorney, just sent me the transcript to see where it was unraveling, and our outreaches to A&R and AOT's reps to make sure they're at the special meeting and can speak to the benefit of these rules.
I met with him this morning to prep him.
Wait, what was his name? What is his name? Maybe he wasn't there and I'm misspeaking because he didn't speak up.
Obi, Mike Obuchowski.
Oh, yeah, he was there. My apologies. He was there.
Okay.
Yeah, good. Okay. Yeah, he was there.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Okay, stay tuned on that.
He's very into those. He's very dedicated.
Mhm. Yeah, he seems it, actually. Okay, any other updates for today? I will say my one update is just that Megan's on vacation, obviously, this week, but both Megan and Rachel would like to join our next transportation task group to present the agenda, to have a constructive feedback conversation about the public hearings and how we present the material.
No, that's good. That's important.
Yeah, the only other update I can provide is that, well, we're going to be presenting our EVSE plan under the NEVI program. It's due August 1st, so we'll be getting that in the next couple of weeks. And then we have our new consultant taking over the new incentive programs. And we rolled out sort of a new way of doing the incentive programs on July 1st for new vehicles. And then our e-bike incentive program should go live next week, and Replace Your Ride incentive program is still slated for the beginning of September.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I was
Happy
gonna
dog,
say,
yeah.
the information that I put in the chat about the researcher culture and what they're doing in California about gasoline super users. I don't know how you guys feel about it. To me, that would be worthy of a presentation, maybe the cross-sector mitigation along with just transitions. I think part of the challenge we're having, like we're having conversations within just transitions, and even with the general public, is folk are having trouble kind of seeing themselves in the advanced clean vehicles, like how do you get into them? But if we could have a conversation about what does the policy look like to get the people who are both the biggest users and also the people most likely to be impacted, that might be a really good conversation to have. But I just wanted to run it. You guys can mull it over and ponder it, but it does seem like it'd be a good data-driven approach to.
Chris, the only big challenge with that, in my opinion, and this is going back to, trying to tax people by how much they drive, not how much they buy, how much gasoline they buy, is when you start monitoring people's mileage on their cars, you run into a whole bunch of social and political issues. So I think I only read what you were putting up really quickly, but you're talking about some kind of odometer readings that would then reflect back to a program. And I know that when you do your inspection every year, you're supposed to do read your odometer. But there's always been a lot of pushback from the public about keeping track of how much people are driving. And so that would be a policy issue that we would have to overcome.
Sure.
I'm not saying it's not impossible, but it's held up a lot of states who are trying to do, what's the term of art, Andrea, for when you tax on usage, depending on how much you drive, you pay more. Yeah.
But to my mind, that we need to start having the conversation. And frankly, we're probably going to go towards a BMT tax nationally or something else anyway, right? Because we have to. Because if you quit taxing gas, you got to find some other alternative. So
V-Trans did a ton of studies on that.
I know I participated in that.
Yeah. So it's just it's a really cool concept. It's just setting it up so that it can happen.
Yeah, but also setting up the EV incentives to where they actually work and do what they're supposed to do would be really nice also. So
yeah.
To me, it's just a policy conversation we should begin to have.
Isn't Drive Electric Vermont doing some work on looking at or VIC on mileage smart and Replace Your Ride? Or maybe that was last year.
What kind of?
Just evaluating how it's working.
They did a survey and they have a report.
Okay. So there's some.
And then we're still working on our contract amendment with Center for Sustainable Energy for incentive optimization, but we anticipate a recommendation coming with their annual report, and in subsequent years revising that to optimize the incentives.
Well, we should definitely be looking for that. That will be important intel.
Okay. Any other comments or updates? I think Jonathan perhaps might be our only member of the public with us today. So John, you can make a comment if you'd like.
Other than the conversation was fascinating. I haven't dialed in for many meetings, so I appreciate hearing what the conversation was about.
Nice to see you.
Thanks.
Yeah, the VMT study is kicking off too. We've got a kickoff meeting coming up for that. I can't remember exactly when that is, but it's soon.
It's next week,
Is it? Yeah, okay.
13th, I think.
Are you overseeing that one, Andrea?
Right now I'm like confused on what I'm doing, but starting to take over a lot of what Joe is doing. No, Matthew Arancio is our in-house project manager, I guess you'd call him. Yeah.
Well, we want to keep track of that one too.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a nice afternoon.
Yep. Bye.
Thanks all.